The government will come under increasing pressure when Parliament resumes today to explain whether Australian authorities paid people smugglers to turn back a boat to Indonesia. This morning, the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop told News Corp papers, "I look forward to hearing the full results of Indonesia's investigation of the people smuggling crimes committed in Indonesia, including any breaches of passport and visa laws and establishing whether the captains and crews of these boats are part of people smuggling syndicates or are paid by them. The best way for Indonesia to resolve any concerns it has about Operation Sovereign Borders is for Indonesia to enforce sovereignty over its borders. Operation Sovereign Borders is necessary because Indonesian boats with Indonesian crews are leaving Indonesia with the express intention of breaching our sovereignty, facilitated by illegal people smuggling syndicates." And Labor has called for the Auditor-General to investigate allegations about Australia paying people smugglers to turn around. Labor's immigration spokesman Richard Marles joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Richard Marles, good morning. What's the thrust of this letter that you've sent to the Auditor-General?
Well, the first thing we want to know is obviously whether or not these payments were actually made. So we've asked the Auditor-General to investigate that question. But I think the next point is this: if in fact these payments were made, are they a proper expenditure of government money, of taxpayer money? And if so, how would the authorisation go in relation to that expenditure, and did that authorisation actually occur? We need to know the answers to those questions very quickly, because ultimately, Joe, we need to get to the bottom of what happened here. We have discrepancies from both the Immigration and the Foreign Minister at the outset saying this never happened, and now we have the Prime Minister over the last few days refusing to deny that it happened, and really, I think going further, inviting the Australian people to believe that that's exactly what occurred. So we need to know what's at the bottom of this.
Why is the Auditor-General the appropriate authority to investigate this?
Oh, because Joe, this goes to a question of the expenditure of Australian taxpayer money, and the Auditor-General is precisely the right person to investigate the propriety of any government expenditure and whether or not the proper processes were gone through in respect of any government expenditure. Now, if Australian taxpayer money has been spent by handing wads of cash over to people smugglers who have come in contact with an Australian Navy vessel, I think we need to understand, firstly, did it happen? Secondly, is that an appropriate expenditure? And thirdly, if it did, what process of authorisation was gone through by those who made the expenditure such that this was all done appropriately.
And are you confident that the Auditor-General would have the appropriate powers to get to the bottom of this and compel evidence?
Well, I think that ultimately the ability of the Auditor-General to compel evidence is a matter for him, but certainly the Auditor-General is the right person to engage in this investigation, and we need to be doing whatever we can right now, Joe, to get to the bottom of this. We need to understand exactly what has happened here. We think the Auditor-General has a useful role to play.
So the Prime Minister says in response to these questions, the only thing to say to this is we've stopped the boats. Why do you believe the Australian public should know more?
Well, I think the Australian public deserve to know how their money is being spent. I mean, that's the first proposition. There should be transparency in the way that government is undertaken. And we've never accepted this question of operational matters as being something which was needed in respect of tackling people smugglers. It has been, from the outset, nothing more than a media strategy, and what it does is deny the Australian people the ability to properly scrutinise a matter which is very much in the public interest. But in this circumstance, Joe, I think this strategy, this tactic, raises another question, and that is whether or not this is a smart way to go in terms of having an enduring resolution to seeing an end to the flow of asylum seeker vessels from Java to Christmas Island. We've spent a lot of energy in putting people smugglers out of business. The last thing you'd want to do is create a new business for them.
There are some people who obviously feel strongly about this, like yourself. Do you really think, though, if it turned out to be true, the average Australian voter would have an issue with it?
I think the question of asylum seeker vessels coming from Java to Christmas Island has rightly been a matter of public interest from day one. I mean, from a Labor perspective, we very much do not want to see the reopening of that journey, because we don't want to see the deaths at sea that was a human tragedy which played out on our border over the last few years. Now,
but what's your credibility like on this subject? Because obviously the Prime Minister's argument is that he has been able to stop the boats where Labor hadn't been able to.
Well, look, I've been the first to admit that in the past there were mistakes made by the former Labor government. If we're wanting to attribute the blame of the past, I would also point to the actions of the coalition in teaming up with the Greens and voting against the Malaysian arrangement, which I believe would have brought an end to this a long time before. I'd also make the point, if we're trying to claim credit for the here and now, the most significant step which has been taken to bring to an end the flow of asylum seeker vessels was the regional resettlement arrangement that was put in place under the former Labor government. But the question now, Joe, is how we go forward on this, and how we make sure that a situation where there are no vessels coming from Java to Christmas Island ends up being an enduring solution. And the point I make is this: if you have a situation where you as a people smuggler interacting with an Australian Navy vessel feel that there is half a chance that you're going to get taxpayer-funded wads of cash given to you, that would seem to me to be a pull factor we would not want to put into the equation. And that's why we need to get to the bottom of exactly what has happened here.
Do you believe, if it's true, it would be clearly a contravention of international law?
I think it's a very, very live question, and I think it's important that, again, we get to the bottom of that. I mean, I note that in the last 24 hours we've had Antonio Guterres, the High Commissioner for Refugees, making comment in relation to this. It is, now that we've got, comments being made at that level, it is clearly having an impact on our relationship with Indonesia, both in terms of the comments made by the Indonesian Foreign Minister, but equally, I think, by the comments that have been made by Australia's Foreign Minister this morning.
Yeah, well, I just mentioned them before we started this. So she said Indonesia needs to lift its game. It's been described as a pretty blistering response. What do you make of that approach, of saying Indonesia has questions to answer here too about the number of boats continuing to leave Indonesia?
Well, I'm not sure of the wisdom of splashing that all over the front pages of our media, but I think what it does do is highlight this. We need to have a constructive working relationship with Indonesia when it comes to the question of asylum seeker vessels going from Java to Christmas Island. That is plain common sense. And we're going to have that relationship if we're going to have a resolution to this endure not over a year or two, but over the next decade or two. And so I think our Foreign Minister's comments absolutely point to the need for a good working relationship with Indonesia. And what is clear from the incidents in the last few days is that this is having an impact on that relationship. And so we need to get to the bottom of this again.
OK, Richard Marles, thanks for talking to us this morning from Canberra.
Thank you, Joe.